Hello and welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Michael Regan along with Kathryn Peterson. And as we love doing each and every Wednesday, we are bringing a new episode with a new topic that we hope will help you, the entrepreneurial sales leader or the person responsible for running a small business, feel inspired about how to level up in your business and in your life. And so today's topic is no different. We talk often about ways in which we can find different productivity hacks. That's a normal macro context topic that comes out there. And today we're going to dive into a very specific aspect of that. And we're going to call this one the to-do list or the not to-do list. You decide. And before I dive into the topic, I, of course, want to bring in my fabulous co-host, Kathryn Peterson. Welcome back, Kathryn.
Nice to see you as always. And this is a good, important topic for us to cover. And we're going to cover the knots. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it because I think often most people are already comfortable with to-do lists. They have them. They've been coached to maybe create these since they were kids. Maybe it was their chore list when they were little kids. Maybe it was their homework list as they were getting a little older. Maybe it was even as they started maturing into the years of high school and into college, like your girls are, where it's like, okay, I've got certain things that I have to get done in order to progress. So this to-do list just becomes a natural byproduct of, I think, the American culture, the psyche that we
Mhm.
operate under. And what I often find is that this to-do list becomes its own monster. It becomes this beast that we have to tame. What's your experience with to-do lists, Kathryn? I mean, I just highlighted the ramp up from maybe where they come from, but what's your experience? Are you a fan of the to-do list?
I do like it to a point. I only let myself put a few things on the list. I know people who have lists of hundreds of items, but for me, it's easiest if I break down like, oh shoot, on my win by noon, I need to do these three things. So the shorter the better for me, because if it's too long, I just ignore it. But I made one this weekend. I was like, hey, I want to make sure I remember to do these things and put a list on the counter and didn't get to all of them, but at least I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that that was even on my list. So it's more of just a memory jog than anything else.
Okay, so you really touched on, I think, the heart of the topic. So let's just go right to, we'll dive right into the deep end of the pool.
Yeah.
I think when most folks think of a to-do list, what they're probably is creating what I think our social scientists call a brain dump, which means I've got all these thoughts in my head, thoughts of things that I'm pretty sure are important and pretty sure need some attention, if not some actual decision making and activity levels. But there's so many of them in there, so many competing thoughts that I need to get them all out of my head and onto paper. And that step, by the way, has proven in modern brain research to be really effective because our brains, as it turns out, are not awesome storage devices. It turns out that the way our brains are function at their best is when we are thinking and making decisions. That's the optimization of our brain. So if we can create space to do that by brain dumping, by getting all of those random thoughts out of our head and onto paper, it gives our brain an opportunity to attack what's on that list with a bit of capacity now, because now we're no longer trying to remember them all. Now we can start interacting with what's on the list. So when you're describing, maybe even the activities of this weekend, is there a bit of a brain dump going on? Is that part of the exercise, is just get all these thoughts down onto paper?
Oh yeah, because if not, then I think about it at 6 in the morning or I think about it at 3 in the morning. And so if it's down, I know that I won't forget and I can reference it when I've got like, oh, great, now I have some time. Let me go back to that list and see what I need to do.
Great, great. All right. Well, we can pull this one forward a little bit because I know the topic is designed to hit the flip side of the coin, but sometimes it's important to define what's on one side so there's some
Yeah.
contrast to the flip. So once we've got a brain dump, once we've organized these things at some level, and there's lots of techniques for doing this. I'm a big fan of the Eisenhower Matrix. We've talked about this before,
Mhm.
where I'll have you whiteboard or split a journal in your book into four quadrants. And we want to separate this giant list of things that all at some point felt important enough to write down, into categories. And so the four categories, we can do this. I think we even have a separate episode on the Eisenhower Matrix, which, is a helpful tool for organizing all of those things that are important by separating the urgent from the not as urgent. And then
Mhm.
sometimes things that are put on us with urgency that we feel are not as important. And of course the fourth being not that urgent and not important. Those things tend to be easy. Those tend to be the ones that, when we're looking at our potential to-do list, are the ones that drop to the bottom pretty quickly. If we can recognize
Mhm.
quickly, well, that's not that important and it's not that urgent, most of us don't need any coaching on that one. That's the easy one. But it is
Yeah.
sometimes tough to separate the things that are very urgent but not that important, or vice versa, things that are very important but not that urgent. It's hard to know what to do with those.
Mhm.
And so we'll maybe unpack that a little further as we look at the not to-do list. But in
Mhm.
the to-do list, yeah, I think sorting through those in some strategy maybe helps get to a place like you described in the Win by Noon, the top three. How do you determine, once you've got all these ideas, let's say you got 8, 10, 20 things written down, how do you pick the ones that you want to attack first? What's your process?
So for me, it can be things I'm avoiding because if I write it down, it's more likely to get done. So it might be, oh, I have to really make that phone call. I'm going to put it on my top three today because those things I will do. And so that's
Mm.
definitely something that it's like eat the frog is a good thing for that. Or it could be something that is something that I'm more likely to forget to do. That might be something that's a little obscure. Like right now, I have to send an invoice. I haven't sent an invoice in years. So I don't even know how to do that, but that's going to be on my list today because it's just one of those things. It's like I keep forgetting to do it and I now need to do it. So it's become urgent and it's
Mm.
a little uncomfortable versus I know I'm going to do my tasks today because I do those every day. So certain things I don't need to put on my list because they're habit, but there's
Yeah.
things that are a little outside my brain that I have to put on the list.
Yeah, I have never in my life on my to-do list put make some coffee and drink a cup before
Right.
9 a.m. That's never been on my
Right.
list. And I think every day of my life since I don't know, 8th grade, I think is when I started drinking coffee. Isn't that scary? Like, wow,
Hmm.
that's a long time drinking coffee. Uh, great. So is a great distinction. Is there are some habits we have, so maybe that would be a good filter so our list doesn't feel too clunky. Is let's don't include the things that are already happening by the nature of routine or by a habit that you've already embraced, because all that does is it stacks things and it creates a bit of a mental block when now all of a sudden you've got all these things on there that you're already going to do. You're able to focus on the ones that you said are either, I don't know, maybe you've been procrastinating a little bit and it's
Hmm.
time to just get these things
Hmm.
done. Is there any, is there, when you do that technique, let's just say you've identified the things that might be a little long in the tooth and it's time to get them off your list. Does your attitude ever change over time? Do you ever start looking at that and think, wait a minute, there's a reason I'm procrastinating. This isn't that good of an idea. Do you ever find yourself thinking, I need a little more executive function on this one? Or is it always just, nope, I know I need to do it, knock it out? How does that process actually unpack for our listeners? Because I'm sure they struggle with this too.
I think over time, I'm pretty good at not adding things to my list that I can delegate or that I don't need to do because I've learned with enough practice that those things are silly to have on the list. So I think for me, normally by the time it actually makes a list, yes. Now I'll tell you if I go to a conference and have a list of 50 things to implement, those are going to start to get knocked off because I might say, you know what, that doesn't actually apply in my market. Oh yeah, that was a great idea. It just I don't have the bandwidth for that, or that might be a next year implementation. So I think that those there's different lists that we go through that can change, but I think what actually ends up in my top three is going to be pretty concise.
All right, so to put a bow on this one, I'll just highlight something that you just naturally are doing, so that our audience can maybe systematize this in case this is not
Mhm.
as easy for them as it has become for those of us who maybe been practicing this. First thing is, when I look at my list, if there's anything on that list that I know I can do in 2 minutes or less, good decision making says just do it. Just get it off your list. If you can do it in 2 minutes or less, if it's that quick, because by nature, you're just truncating the list, which is always a good thing. So whether you're doing this with physical pieces of paper or inbox stuff in your email, or whether you're doing it with desktop stuff in your computer, you, just the opportunity to clear stuff off 2 minutes or less, just do it. If you can't do it in 2 minutes or less, but it's still important enough that it needs to be done, schedule it. So that's tip number two. Do it as tip number one, 2 minutes or less. If it's 2 minutes or more, schedule it. That's tip number two. You indicated the third one, which is if it can be done by someone else and it doesn't require your expertise or it's not your high payoff activity, find the right person and delegate it. Put that ball back in their court. Give them an opportunity to succeed. Great studies on this one. Happy to dig into those. My favorite is an old Harvard Business Review article called "It's Not My Monkey," and it's one we can definitely unpack. But if you know that something on your list can be done by someone else and it's not a high payoff activity for you, that's tip number three: delegate it. And the fourth would be again, if it falls into that category of, it's not a high payoff activity for me, it's not really even something I need to give to someone else, it's not something I can do in 2 minutes or less, it might not be a good idea at all. It should probably be removed altogether from the list because sometimes that clutter, if it's not in one of those three categories, makes it noisy. And so we might say delete it or, move it off the list and put it, like you said, somewhere else in the journal of these are just some ideas I can come back to at a later date. All great tips for the to-do list. So let's flip that coin, Kathryn. Let's look at
Mhm.
so what distinguishes then a uh, exercise of the not to-do list? Because this was something that was brought to my attention maybe 15 years ago in coaching, and it profoundly changed the way I attacked my day. Um, Help me understand your level of engagement with the not to do list. How do you distinguish that from the to do list in your current practice?
So I think for me, when it's important to really put that into place is when you start to build a team. And there are people who fill the space and fill the time that they have with stuff that they really should not be doing. And that could be as simple as like my first to do list included scanning documents, copying stuff, putting packages together, um, dealing with mail, things like that. That I was like, I need to, even though it can fill the space, if I feel like I need a mental break, I should not be doing these things at all. So I think that's kind of the first step of it is when you have a person and that's their role. They want to help. But I know people who still go, oh, it's okay. I can do it. I'll do it. I'll do it. And they have to learn to push those things aside. So that's kind of my first introduction to not to do list. What about yours? I'm curious on your profound changes.
Yeah, well, I think what most of us that have started a small business or are full-time sales professionals and responsible for any level of profitable activity comes directly from the amount of sales energy we put into it. We start off as maybe what some would call a solopreneur. Like at some point, it's just you. You get to wear all the hats. You get to do
Mhm.
everything. So all of the things that are necessary in order to produce revenue fall on your plate. And at some point, we hit whatever that capacity is for each of us. Some of us have a little more energy, some of us are a little more diligent. We don't need to get into the weeds. What we need to get clear on is we all know what it feels like when I'm at my capacity. If the only way I can get more done is just work more hours, which, by the way, is a risk that many of us take, and it's a dangerous one if we get stuck in that mindset that the only way to get more done is work more hours. But you're describing, I think, exactly the path that the not to do list comes from, which is once I've decided to add a teammate, once my business has matured to where I need to add a teammate or a couple of teammates, the very first mistake that most of us make at that point is we forget to design a process. And once we've designed a process, what you're doing intuitively in the not to do list is very natural and intuitive. But if we don't create a process, remember, we came from solopreneur. It's very tempting to think, just follow me, or I'll just give you stuff, or we jump right to delegating things that someone's never done before, or they don't have experience with, or even worse, they think they know how to do it, but they're not like us and they don't speak like we might or handle it like we might. And so this not to do list becomes very difficult to embrace because we don't have the proper systems in place that maybe even come from the proper training that's necessary because we never designed the process. We're just doing what we do. Well, I know how to do this. I've always done it this way. Just follow my lead. Well, life can certainly function at some level that way, but it's very difficult to scale. So if
Mhm.
you are in a business where this idea of a not to do list intrigues you, maybe first evaluate, have I brought on teammates and built and scaled my model without a clearly defined process, which needs to be written down? You need to be able to provide evidence of it. Like, don't just verbalize it. It's been created and written down. Have you then trained roles and responsibilities for where those ideal handoffs would happen in this process that you've created? And are you really clear on the roles that handle those, not the people? Because that's another mistake we make, is sometimes we design our process around people, and then that person suddenly decides to take another job, or then that
Mhm.
person suddenly decides, yeah, life at home got busy and I can't do that like I used to do that. And then we're discouraged and disappointed. All of these things contribute to the fundamentals of a not to do list, because if I'm going to coach any of us to let go of things that either aren't high payoff activities for you or aren't within your role, it's built upon that precipice. So that was really the big lift I had, Kathryn, was realizing, okay, if I'm going to design a team, it's going to function really well. And the payoff of that is we can scale. I mean, for me, that was the motivation to have a team. It wasn't so that we could just do the same business and have more people to pay. It was so we could multiply. If we're going to do that, design that process, create really clear roles and responsibilities, and then we can look at what we would call the not to do list, which is where we give our teammates permission to say, no, 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 please don't do that. I've got that. That's on that,
Mhm.
leave that alone. That's on me. Um, so when have you seen this process and these roles and responsibilities work really well? And then where have you seen it where, okay, our listeners need to learn from maybe a place where we tripped up? Tell us about your experience with either of those.
Yeah, it can be good for self-discipline. So to say, "Hey, I'm not gonna check email until 9 because I need to make sure I get through my morning routine." Or, "I'm not gonna look at, social media after 7." So some of those can be some things that can just strengthen what your goals are. But also, I think it's really good because if everyone is clear on the duties you were talking about, they're gonna know like, hey, that's my job. I have full ownership of that. Catherine's not gonna touch that piece. So, and at first it might be, hey, I'm not going to jump in the middle of a loan process. I'm not going to send out a contract. That's done by my transaction coordinator if you're a real estate agent. So there's certain things that you can do to say, because what happens is sometimes people will ignore the not to do list and they'll say, well, it was just easier for me to do it because they weren't getting to it, or it was easier for me to do it. And then you have this duplication. So then occasionally I'll see from agents, I'll get the contract twice because the transaction coordinator sends it out 3 days after they're under contract, and the agent is like, wait a minute. And so having some of those minimum standards can really help stick to the not to do list. But we definitely can see duplication because if you're going to have duplication, what's the point of having different roles? So there's some great things that a not to do list can define. And they, once you make it, you really have to stick to it and make sure you're clear on your expectations and everyone's roles.
Yeah, so go back to that Eisenhower matrix that I
Mhm.
laid out earlier, and I realize for those of you listening, that might be a harder thing to visualize than it is to understand by hearing. So feel free, go out onto the Google and find a visual of this because there are plenty of PDFs. Type in Eisenhower matrix, and you'll see exactly what I'm going to describe. But as you create the vertical and horizontal four-box model, the two boxes on the left are the things that are important and urgent for you from the things that are important that are not as urgent. And those are the ones I delegated one and or defined as one and two. Do it or schedule it. Those fall on your to-do list. The right side becomes your not to-do list. These are the things you either delegate or delete. And so in order to do this delegation process that you're describing here, we have to be really clear on have we properly defined where these roles and responsibilities fall? Whose job is it? And then can I, as the person who's maybe the team lead, check my ego enough to say things like, well, I'll just do it real fast or whatever that scenario. I can just
Mhm.
do this. Well, there's a cost for that. And when you do that, you're maybe saving time in that one moment. But what you're also doing at the very same time is you're communicating to that person on the team, you're not doing your job.
Mhm.
And that may not be your intention, but that is the way that will be received. People will not always remember what you say, but they will always remember how you make them feel. And if you've got a teammate who feels like, oh, great, so he's just going to jump in there, she's just going to do that, that creates a negative feedback loop that now you've got to manage as a team leader. And maybe it's because you just didn't respect the to-do list from the not to-do list.
Mhm.
You also touched on one that's a little bit different twist on this, so I want to catch that because it's also important, and I think our listeners will totally understand this. Sometimes, we're talking about this in the context of a team, roles, responsibilities, and a process flow. But sometimes these things are not related to the team. They're just personal disciplines, things that
Mhm.
maybe are distractions, things that are maybe not high payoff activities, but there's a dopamine hit. Things like scrolling through your social media, things like letting your inbox be your list of things to do. These are things that we get in the habit of doing. Let's talk a little bit about those personal disciplines because I liked that you referenced those and I don't want to miss those in our
Mhm.
topic today. How do you determine those the to do from the not to do? Because those don't necessarily involve delegation to another
Mhm.
person or a teammate. Those are just choices we have to make
Yeah.
between are these really good things to be spending our time on? What's your decision making on those?
So that's one thing I actually wanted to bring up because there is kind of this weird exception to the rule when it involves some personal things. Because I think about like some things I really don't like doing, like cleaning bathrooms. That's going to be on my personal not to do list. I can delegate it, I can find a person to do that for me. And I don't ever want to do that. But like weeding, actually, I enjoy depending on where it is in the yard. So that might be on my list because it's a great way for me to think. It's a good way for me to get energy. So some of it might involve energy and it's relaxing to me. So that's an okay thing to keep on my list to me because yeah, does it make sense that I'm a, lone originator, branch manager doing weeding? No, but I like it. So I'm going to keep it on my list. So there is that little caveat there, but I think there's also some things like, hey, do I really want to risk my safety because that could take me out of work? So there's certain things I may not do, like hang up lights or jump off a cliff or things that are on my not to do list because I do want to make sure that I'm effective at work. And so those things also end up there too, of just,
Wait, I'm really curious about which activities fell on your weekend list that involved, I think I'm going to hang some lights or maybe jump off a cliff. Like, wow, that's a fun weekend. Catherine, I like where you're going with that. And I hope our listeners really are feeling a sense of, okay, yeah, that's true for me as well. There are certain things that someone else would tell me, hey, that's not a high payoff activity. You shouldn't be doing that. And yet, for some reason, I find joy in it. For some reason, it's a good thing. Look, I think what you're doing is really important for us to define right now. A high payoff activity does not imply money. It implies high payoff in terms of value. And so don't confuse money with value, because not everything we spend money on creates, high value. Just ask folks who pay a lot of money in taxes. They'll debate this one with you on whether or not they get their value out of that. Um, so you're really wise to realize that if something creates value for you, and sometimes that value can be, this is just calming for me, or this gives me time to think, or this gives me time to just be out in nature, smell
Mhm.
fresh air, not be in front of a computer screen. These are all potentially high payoff activities that are worth evaluating based on you as a leader. And the key to this decision is knowing the cost. Everything has a cost. And so, as long as you know the cost, you can determine if, hey, the financial cost of me doing that is worth it, because the cost of me not doing it might involve things that are even, who knows, maybe even more expensive. I used
Mhm.
to have a joke that certain things we do are cheaper than therapy. Turns out that's a true statement. Therapy is an expensive thing. And so if you can provide some self-care for yourself by getting out in the garden and pulling some weeds, that could turn out to be a really high payoff activity, more than maybe some people would believe. So I like that you're drawing that distinction, and I hope our audience hears that loud and clear. High payoff activity does not imply money. It implies value, and you just have to be clear on what is the value. That's really good. Anything else on that topic?
I would say that your not to do list is going to change. And like now, I wouldn't even think about scanning a document, but I have to change my not to do list as your team changes and as your team grows. And that's okay. So I think it's a good thing to revisit every so often to say, hey, now I'm at this different point. Like I wouldn't have mentioned weeding 5 years ago as something to put on my it's okay to do list. I would have been like, I'm never doing that in my whole life. So things change and that's fine. And you do have to reevaluate this every so often.
Great, great. Well, let's pull this one into the station. I think if our audience can grab this for today, it's being really clear on the distinction of why certain things fall on your to-do list and how to organize them once they're on there, and then how to separate those from things that are on your not to-do list. And in some cases, it's learning how to delegate those things, because it's really clear in the process that you've created that certain things fall under other people's role and responsibility. And then in this personal application that we landed on, determining where the value is for the things that you choose to do or not to do. And then being really clear on why you don't do them, and maybe creating a contingency for those, because certainly if you're not going to pull the weeds, that's okay, but somebody has to. And I think that's probably true of a lot of things in our lives and a lot of the things that we manage. So it really all falls back into the general category of, being thoughtful, being proactive, and designing a plan. So many of us resist planning because it just seems cumbersome. But really, what we did today is a really effective and simple version of planning: how to create the to-do list, how to create the not to-do list, and then creating the boundaries around those so that we can maybe feel the lift. And I'll land on your last comment. It's okay to revisit that list from time to time and say, okay, time for a new version of the not to-do list, because maybe some things have changed. Kathryn, thanks for joining me on this topic today. I hope our audience picked up a few tips, some things that either encourage them that they're doing well, or a few ideas that maybe they can implement as they head into a season in which we're pushing hard to finish 2025 if you're listening in real time. And I hope that revisiting your to-do and your not to-do list gives you the clarity you need to level up both at home and at work. And that's going to put a wrap on this week's episode of Building Bigger Lives. Thanks for joining us. We hope you'll find us each and every week on the podcast platform of your choice. And if you're following us on YouTube, where we have the video feed of this very same podcast, feel free to add some comments, join the conversation, and share an episode. We'd love it if you'd bring more people along. Have a great day.